What's going on, guys? This is Gene Jensen, and this video is all about the baits that I'll be using in the month of August. All right, so the month of August, I'm gonna have to admit, it is my least favorite month of the year to fish. I don't mind the winter time because you can put a bunch of clothes on and stay warm, but in the summertime, you can only get so naked until it's illegal. And so I get miserable in August. But I'm still fishing, I'm still catching big fish. It's still a great time of the year to fish. You just have to know where and how to find them and that kind of stuff. And I got tons of videos about that, but this is all about the baits that I'm going to talk about. Now in this video, all the links are going to be down in the description to all the baits. And these are all Tackle Warehouse affiliate links. And I'm also going to put cards to videos on how to fish many of these baits. Unfortunately, YouTube limits me to just a few of them, I think 5 or 6 videos that I can put on there, but I'm going to put as many as I can on there so you guys can go watch those and learn all the details about how to fish these baits. All right, let's start with number 1. All right, so this is going to be a little bit different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the day, because August is one of those months where they change 4 times a day. Okay, so you've got your early morning bite. You've got your mid-morning bite when the sun starts to hit the water, and then you've got that hot afternoon bite that actually starts about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and then your evening bite, 5 o'clock on. And so we're going to talk about baits that I will be using during those periods of time and those transitions. So early in the morning, man, it is all about topwater. I'm serious, it's all about topwater. Those fish have been up shallow all night long feeding, and they're still shallow. The sun hasn't hit the water, hadn't started to push them deep, or hadn't started pushing them under and into cover. So first thing I'm gonna pull out is a buzzbait. Now, a buzzbait is great. I don't like the trailers. If you guys have watched my videos for years, or the trailers, the skirts, I pull the skirts off of them and I put a horny toad or a grub or something like that on there and just throw it around the shallows, cover those flat points and those flats that are along the edges and around docks and things like that. Just cover a lot of water with it. The next one is if I'm fishing a lake that has a lot of grass, like Gunnersville, Chickamauga, lakes up north, I'm throwing a frog, but I'm not throwing, for say, unless I'm fishing matted vegetation, I'm not throwing the pointed nose frogs. I like the poppin' frogs. This is the pop shad from Spro, and this is the trash panda, poppin' trash panda from 13. They are what I'm going to throw. 1, because they're easy to walk, and 2, because they got plenty of popping action, and you can make them look like a shad or a bluegill in the shallows, and the bass absolutely wreck them. So these are a number 1. All right, so another one I might throw that I don't have in my tackle bag. Look at these nice little tackle bags from Plano anyway. I like them. They just kind of where I hold all my extra stuff. But anyway, so what I don't have is a whopper plopper, or a Berkeley Chapo, or those two style of baits that I would throw. And when I would throw those is when I had a lot of wind in the morning, maybe a front moving through, that stuff like that. I'm going to throw a whopper plopper, and I say a Chapo because it works just as good. It's just $10 less, and I'm cheap. By heart, I'm cheap. My dad was cheap, I'm cheap. And so I'm going to go for the less expensive thing there is. But anyway, those two are really good. Then come about, 10:30-ish, you'll notice that your bite starts to slow down, your shallow water bite and that kind of stuff. And the next few baits are going to be the ones where you're kind of fishing that transition. All right, so the next series of baits is going to be during that transition. Once the sun hits the water, and before they get into their noon or their really hot water spots, I'm going to be fishing them in that transition when they're moving from shallow to deeper, shallow into thicker cover, or under docks and that kind of stuff. All right, and so the baits I'm going to use are baits that are no longer top water, but I can still cover a lot of water, or I can get it in and under things. So the 3 baits, number 1 is going to be a swim jig. They've seen a ton of blade baits, a lot of bladed jigs, that kind of stuff, tons of chatterbaits. And so I'm going to throw something like this. This is a greenfish tackle swim jig. You guys know this is pretty much the only swim jig I throw. I have some 6 cents ones that I throw every once in a while, but I have a whole bunch of these and I fish them a lot. Bluegill patterns is what I'm looking for, because the bluegill stay shallow, and I'm going to be still working shallow and working my way around, and I find that bluegill patterns work really good during that transition period. Next one is going to be a jig, some type of a jig that I can skip under a dock. Okay, and this is the jig. This is one of the jigs I use. Oranges aren't important. I like browns and blacks, and green pumpkins are the colors I'm throwing. And as I'm working docks, I'm skipping it around the edges and the corners of the docks, those active fish that are still feeding and are going to be on the outside corners. I'm working it underneath any kind of shade that's still on the bank. I'm going to work a jig, and I'm going to work that swim jig. That's key. Until that shade goes away, you're liable to find some fish up shallow and in that stuff. Also in the grass and that kind of stuff. But the other bait I'm going to throw is going to be a Senko. All right, I left all my Senkos out in the barn on purpose. Just didn't feel like getting them out of the drawer. But a Senko is one of those that when you need to skip it underneath the dock, it's a good one to have when they're kind of in a funk. The weather has just been nasty and hot and muggy and everything else. I'm going to throw a Senko in the shadiest areas that I can find. And it's one of those baits that you can get way up in the shady areas. And that bite will hold true throughout the rest of the day. So the rest of the day, let's talk about from about 10:30 to about 5 p.m. What kind of baits am I going to switch to? What am I going to be fishing? All right, so that heat of the day transition, what are the bass going to do? The bass are literally, they're going to move underneath docks. They're going to move into really, really thick cover like grass, a little bit of offshore grass. They might move deep into submerged grass and just kind of hang out in there, or off the drops and the ledges out off of the points. And so there's several different types of baits that you can use during those situations. Let's talk about shallow grass first. My number one go-to rig is going to be a Texas rig. 1/4 or 3/8 ounce, maybe a 1/2 ounce. And if I find that the bass want a slow fall, I'm going to throw a 1/4 ounce and just try to work it through the thick grass as best I can. But 3/8 is usually where I start. I peg it always. I'm fishing in the grass. I want that weight to stay real close to the bait, and I'm going to be flipping in. Now the bait that I'm going to use is, it might surprise you. Typically I'm going to use a creature bait or some type of a crawl bait or stuff like that most of the times of the year. But in the heat of the summer, in that grass, my favorite bait is a flipping worm that I call, or a swimming worm. And what has become my go-to swimming worm is the joystick from 13 Fishing. And let me pull one out real quick. Matter of fact, let me pull one out of the black ones, are called the color they call New Moon, so you guys can see it a little bit better. I love worms that first of all have a nice pointed head that the bullet weight can fit right over top of. It's got a little bit of chunk or beef to it, a little bit of meat, so if it does get beat up, it lasts a little bit longer than what a normal skinnier worm would last. But it's got these kicking, swimming, what they call rabbit ear tails, and it's got plenty of action. Yet you can see when I hold it like this, they come together and they slide through that grass real easy. So I'm flipping that grass over and over again, just flip it in, let it fall to the bottom, hop it up a few times, bring it back out, and I'm just doing that over and over and over again. And this thing slides in and it gets tons of bites. A lot better than a creature bait, but there are times where I want a smaller profile and I still want that kick, and I'm going to switch to some type of a creature bait. Well, 13 has moved those same, almost dropped my phone, same rabbit ear tails over to the Invader, which is my other flipping bait. And no, this isn't a 13 commercial. This is just what I use. And so I'm going to use that most of the time. Now, if it's a hot day and there's a whole lot of wind on the water and that kind of stuff, I'm going to go back to the tried and true Rage Bug. Seriously, this thing, it's one of those that you can, it catches a lot of fish. Doesn't last as long on the hook as an Invader, but it has caught me hundreds and thousands of fish, and it's just a really, really good flipping bait. Small, compact, easy bite. They jump on it really, really quick, any one of these baits, but that flipping bite is what I'm going to go for in the thick brush and in the shallow grass and that kind of stuff. Now, one of the things that I love to add this time of the year to those flipping baits, specifically any of the swimming worms, like the joystick or maybe a cutter worm from Rage Tail or whatever, is a punch skirt. Now, this is one already rigged up. This is actually the Slither rig from Strike King. But you can buy these punch skirts that just slide on the weight, or in between the weight and the hook, and they work just as good. And what happens is, it's just a sinker. It's a skirt. You run your line through there, tie the line to the hook, and then the hook goes up inside that skirt. So it's like a jig with a big trailer, but it punches a whole lot better and goes through the cover better. This has got me a ton of really big bites, especially along the Tennessee River, fishing the grass and that kind of stuff. And I imagine it would work just as good anywhere else there's grass. But a punch skirt added to your worm or added to your creature bait, maybe, I don't typically do that, will work. I mean, it'll get you bites anyway. It's awesome. All right, so say you're fishing a lake that doesn't have grass. Where do the fish go? They're gonna go off of those drops on those points. If you were catching them on a big point, big flat point in the morning, they're gonna pull out to the ends or off the steep side of those points, and they're either gonna suspend or they're gonna just sit on the bottom or sit close to the bottom. And they're gonna sit in a spot where bait fish, shad and bluegill will swim past them. And so they're gonna kind of hang out. Well, what I love to throw, and what I've been throwing all summer long, and what I've been catching giants on all summer long, are big worms and jigs. And we're gonna talk about a jig real quick. Oh, I left that other jig out in my boat. All right, I can just tell you about it. So this is the same jig I showed earlier. It's a greenfish tackle skipping jig, I believe. But anyway, so what I love is I love living rubber skirts. When I'm fishing deep in the summer, when it's just hotter than blue blazes and these fish aren't super active when it's hot during the day, I like to go to 100% living rubber skirt. And Greenfish has one called the big rubber skirt, I believe, or big rubber jig. And I'll link it in the bottom. That's the one I'm going to use. And if I don't have one of those, I literally will rip all of the silicone skirt off of this jig, so I just have the living rubber and I'll fish it. That's how important it is to me. It really does work. It's got the right kind of action. I wouldn't say it's got a lot of action, but when you are dragging super slow and there's a little bit of current, that living rubber will move so easily in that current and give you the action you need, that slow, lethargic action you need to be able to entice bites. The trailers I'm going to use are just your regular chunk trailers, maybe a craw, like a rage craw or something like that, something that's got good claws that have a lot of kick to it. And that'll also give you action during that when it's moving really, really slow. Now, my bread and butter is still the Texas rig. If you are flipping and pitching in the morning, pull that creature bait or whatever off of that hook and put on a big worm. Okay, this one is a giant worm. This is a fairly big worm. This is a Zoom Old Monster, and this is a Magnum Old Monster from Zoom. These are the two I'm dragging. I don't typically drag anything smaller. I want a big worm, and I'm going to drag it so slow I'm counting the rocks that I'm going over with the sinker. Tungsten weight is almost a must. I've compared tungsten to lead, and I always get more bites with tungsten, and I think it has to do with the sound of that tungsten up against those rocks. Sounds more natural. I don't know, but all I know is I get more bites with it. So anyway, big worm drug out off of offshore structure is gonna get you bites in the summertime. All right, so sometime during the evening, about 5:30, the bass start to transition out of that deeper or thicker cover, the deeper spots and stuff like that. And I've had the great privilege of being able to guide on a private lake years ago that it was stocked and had tons of bass, and I was able to learn a ton about how they transition according to light during the day. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. That light gets at a certain angle, or that sun does, and those bass start to move up, and they stop biting for about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And I'm gonna grab a couple of, this gives me the perfect opportunity to pull rods out and change baits and retie and stuff like that. And so I'm gonna pull out a couple of baits. I'm gonna go back to the swim jig, the Greenfish Tackle swim jig. I'm gonna go to the same one I was throwing in the morning, and I'm gonna throw it around, but I'm gonna throw it a lot slower than I did in the morning. These bass are still kind of funky. The water's a lot hotter than it was in the morning and that kind of stuff. And the second one I'm gonna throw is, of course, the jackhammer, the chatterbait. This thing slow rolled on the bottom. Literally, you want to try to feel the blade thumping and the bait on the bottom at the same time, throwing in about 6, 8, 10 feet of water all the way up shallow, and just figure out where those bass are. But the biggest thing is just keep it slow, keep it low to the bottom, and you'll be able to catch them. Those are the two baits I'm gonna go for. Maybe slow roll a spinner bait, maybe a jerk bait, but those are the two I'm gonna go to the first and the earliest, and try to fish those throughout the rest of the night until it starts to get dark, and then it gets into night fishing, and that's a whole nother video. But those are the baits for August. Stay cool, stay hydrated. Let's go back to my military days where I was a medic. Drink lots of water or you will be sorry. I'm I promise. But the best thing is get out there and have some fun. And if you like this video, hit the like button. Be sure to subscribe. But like I always say, be sure to introduce somebody to fishing. Introduce them to my channel. Let me help you teach them how to fish. More importantly, get out on the water, go out and catch some fish, and have a great day. We'll see you.